As you rightly said, the teaching of Bhagavan are very simple, and
Yes.
the only thing that probably is lacking is a clear understanding of what I is.
Yes.
That's
Yes. Yes.
the most difficult topic, actually,
Yes. Well,
because it's so difficult to grasp. It leads also to various other problems, such
yes.
as will and
Yeah.
everything else.
This is why Bhagavan said in verse 19 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, this whole problem about fate and will. That is, it's an age-old problem in philosophy. Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, always this is the basic thing. To what extent are we free to act according to our will? And if we act according to our will, to what effect does that change what is to happen? So the dispute between what is predetermined and what is and what scope there is for our will. Bhagavan says in verse 19, this dispute about which prevails, fate or will, is only for those who lack what he calls the viveka, the discernment or discrimination of the root of fate and will. The root of fate and will is ego. When we are asleep, we neither have any will, we have no likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, or anything, nor do we experience any fate.
Yeah.
But as soon as we wake, as we rise as ego in waking or dream, the first thing we know, we have a will. We have likes, dislikes, and so on. According to the law of karma, as taught by Bhagavan, our will, the seed form of our will is our vāsanās. The first manifestation of vāsanās is in the form of likes, dislikes, desires, and so on. Because we have likes, dislikes, desires, and so on, they prompt us to act in one way or another. And the actions that we do according to our will are what are called agamya. Agamya, those actions we do by our will are called agamya. Agamya bears fruit. To put it in very simple terms, actions that are morally good bear good fruit. Actions that are morally bad bear bad fruit. What is moral or what ethical? It's not according to the ethical standards of society, because different societies have different ethical standards. So it is a more fundamental form of right and wrong. That is basically those things that we do selfishly, we do for our own benefit without caring for others, are bad actions. Those we do with concern for others are good actions. That's the simplest we can put it. So actions that are causing harm to others are bad actions. Actions that are well-intentioned, not intended to cause harm, are good actions. But it's not for us to judge that. I mean, the law of karma will judge that for us. Well, the power behind the law of karma, as Bhagavan says, is God. We have to bring God in here because as Bhagavan said, God in the sense of God as a separate entity is as real as ego. Only when we rise as ego does the world and God come into existence. So though the reality of God is our own real nature, so long as we rise as ego, we seem to be separated from our own real nature. So our real nature manifests as another, as God. So God has the function of regulating this law of setting this law of karma. So the actions that are they're good actions, bad actions, and neutral actions, they all bear fruit. Those fruit are stored in what is called sanchita. Sanchita simply means a heap or a pile. So that is the store of the fruits of our past actions. They remain in that pile until they are experienced. They are experienced only when they're selected by God and allotted as our prarabdha. Prarabdha means our fate or destiny. So everything that we are to experience in this life, all the pleasures and pains, the good and bad experiences, are all determined by prarabdha, which is allotted by God. There's a huge, the Sanchita is a huge store of unexperienced fruit. So there's a large choice for God to select. So he selects those fruit that will be most beneficial for our spiritual advancement, our spiritual development. So they are what we now experience as our fate. So everything that we are to experience, everything that happens to us, is determined by prarabdha. What is to happen is going to happen. What is not to happen is not going to happen. That is absolutely fixed. However, though we cannot change what is destined to happen, and we can't experience anything that is not destined to happen, and we can't avoid experiencing what is destined to happen, we are free to want to. Just because something is destined to happen to me doesn't mean I want it to happen to me. Or just because I want something to happen doesn't mean it's going to happen. So on the one hand, there is fate. On the other hand, there is will. So they're two completely separate domains. What we are to experience and what we want to experience, they're two separate domains. In between these two are our actions. Our actions are driven both by our will and by fate. That is, because we have likes, dislikes, desires, and attachments, we're always trying to achieve what we want, what we like, and to avoid what we dislike. Our actions are constantly being influenced by our will. So the majority of actions, we can say, are driven by our will. But at the same time, in order for us to experience whatever is destined to happen, certain actions are necessary, actions of our body, speech, and mind. So our destiny, the actions that we need to do in order to experience what is destined to happen, we will be made to do. That is what Bhagavan wrote in the note he wrote for his mother. In the first sentence, he said, according to the prarabdha of each one, he who is for that is a way of referring to God or Guru, or the one who allots for prarabdha. He who is for that, being there, that means being in each place, implying in the heart of each person, will cause to dance. So in other words, if we will be made to do those actions that are necessary for us to do in order for us to experience destiny. That doesn't mean that all the actions we do are actions we're driven to do according to our destiny, because our will is also there. So these two are working side by side. Often they work in sync. If it's your destiny to have a nice meal today, you will decide, you will go to the shops, you'll buy the ingredients, you'll cook the food, and you'll eat it. That is because it's your destiny to eat that meal. You have to do those actions, but it's not without desire that you're doing that. You also want to enjoy a good meal. That's so not only is your destiny driving you to go to the shops to buy the ingredients and to cook the food, your will is also. So in many actions are driven by both destiny and will. That just because something is destined to happen doesn't mean that our will is not also playing a role, because it's destined to happen, but we also want it to happen. So both are the actions that are necessary to bring that about. Both our will and our destiny are driving us to do that. There are some things that we're destined to experience that we don't want to experience, so we try to avoid it. But however much we try to avoid it, we cannot avoid it. There are some things that we want, but are not destined to happen. For example, you want to eat a nice tasty meal today, but you go out and the shops are closed, or those particular ingredients aren't there. So however much you try, you cannot experience what you're not destined to experience. So since these two forces, our will and destiny, are both driving our actions, we cannot distinguish to what extent each action is driven by will and to what extent it's driven by destiny. We cannot distinguish this, and we need not distinguish it. That is no concern of ours. Those actions that are we are to do according to destiny, we cannot avoid doing those actions. The only actions we can avoid doing is those actions that are driven by our will. However, so long as we have a will, we will inevitably be doing actions driven by our will. So we don't need to know which actions are driven by our will. What we need to do is to curb our will. In other words, to curb our vāsanās. Generally, when we allow our attention to go outwards, our mind wanders under the sway of its vāsanās. But even when the mind is wandering under the sway of its vāsanās, because we have many vāsanās that tend to pull us in different directions. So we may have a vāsana may arise. We may want to we may want to do something, but we know that is not very good for us. So we decide, no, I want to avoid doing that. So there are vāsanas pulling us in two directions. One is to do it, another is not to do it. And we as ego have the final say. We can either follow this desire or we can follow that desire. The desire to do or the desire to avoid doing, that is our freedom. So we are free to which vasanas we to follow, and we're also free whether to follow vasanas at all. Instead of following our vasanas, we can simply turn our attention within and avoid being swayed by vasanas at all. So that freedom we as ego have. So we do have freedom of will. And if we follow a particular desire, that particular desire will either prompt us to act in a certain way or to refrain from acting in a certain way. So our actions are driven by our will, which is under the control of ourself as ego. So this is what Bhagavan called, he distinguished two types of freedom. The basic freedom is what he called Uḷḷadu. Uḷḷadu means the freedom of will. We are free to want or not to want, whatever we want. And we're also free to allow ourselves to be swayed by this vasana, or to allow ourselves to be swayed by that vasana, or to avoid being swayed by any vasana. That freedom we have, that is the freedom of will. And associated with that freedom of will, there is also freedom of action. Because if I allow myself to be swayed by this desire, it will prompt me to do such and such an action. So that action is done according to my freedom of will. So that is what the freedom to act as we want is what is called, what Bhagavan called Kriya Swatantra. That's freedom of action. I don't know about in your language, but in English, the term used is free will. But free will is a very imprecise term, because generally when people talk about free will, what they mean is freedom to do what you want, which is not actually freedom of will, it's freedom of action. But it's supposing we had no freedom of will, then freedom of action would be meaningless. It's meaningless to say, oh, you can do whatever you're free to do whatever you want, but you're not free to want whatever you want. If you have no freedom of will, then freedom of action is meaningless. So Bhagavan first he distinguished them, but then he said, because the freedom of action depends on the freedom of will, he generally talked about them together. He then made a compound term, Icha Kriya Swatantra. That means freedom to will and to act. And he said that Ichakriya Swatantra is the basis of the whole law of karma. If we had no Ichakriya Swatantra, we wouldn't be able to do agamya, because agamya is by definition actions that we do by our Ichakriya Swatantra, our freedom to will and act. And those actions are what bear fruit. And if we didn't do any action but bear fruit, there would be no fruit to experience as destiny. So the whole law of karma is based upon our freedom to will and act. So this is why he said this whole dispute about which prevails, fate or will, is only for those who lack discrimination about the root of fate and will. If we understand that we as ego are the root of both fate and will, that is, we as ego, we have our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, fears, so on, that is our will. We also have to experience the consequences of the actions we do according to our will. That is fate. They are two entirely separate domains. Our will cannot change what is destined to happen. What is destined to happen cannot change what we want to happen. So they're two, neither prevails over the other. They're two separate jurisdictions. Just like the courts in one country cannot prevail over the courts in another country, each court has its own jurisdiction. Within that, if you're in the UK, you're bound by the courts of the UK. If you're in Belgium, you're bound by the courts of Belgium. We have a common court, the court of the European court. But unfortunately, we just backed out of that. So
I absolutely agree with you, Michael. Yes.
So you asked whether something that is non-existent, an ego, can have a will.
Well, yeah, that's a big question, because frankly, the whole argument, as you rightly said, about the will and destiny is based upon us assuming that what is happening now is real. And yes, indeed, something is happening. Indeed, we are willing, and indeed we are acting.
Yes, yes.
But at the same time, if, for example, we are keen enough to analyze the situation and not take this waking state and try to take as wide as possible, including our dreams and sleep, then some doubts would rise. For example, when I sleep, I see lots of dreams. And if I take as a truth that the present state is similar to that of a dream,
yes,
then we can sort of look at the dream and find some similarities to what we experience now. And then analyzing these similarities, we can sort of judge what can we take for granted and what can we take for real.
Yes.
As a person, when I sleep, during my life, I've seen many dreams when I slept. And in every dream, and when I was a kid, 10 years old, 5 years old, even now when I look at my picture when I was 5, it's the same eye.
Yes.
And it's the same eye. All through these many, many years, so many other dreams in which it looked as if we were acting in a certain way. It looked as if we were experiencing certain things.
Yes.
It looked as if we had a will to do so, because we did something, as you rightly said. We cannot do without willing to do so. Any action is preceded by a will, a thought to do so. And some dreams we don't want to wake from. We want them to last forever. And some dreams we want to wake up immediately. And looking at that, and as Bhagavan said, the only difference is just because one is short, the other is long. Then the one thing that is apparent is that our mind is capable of projecting a certain world. And in that world, we find ourselves as an individual that acts and possibly wills something, and experiences a lot of stuff. But then, when the dream ends, we understand that it was a dream, and even though we fought somebody, even maybe we killed somebody in the dream, it never actually happened at all. So it was just a projection, and all our fears, desires, dislikes that we experienced during the time were fake, not real at all. And if they seem to us to be real, but when we saw that, no, it was nothing, and all the worries went away. So if we sort of copy that experience to our present state, then it might be so that even this state is working according to the similar laws. And basically there is, even in this world, all our desires, all our actions, even though even those arguments we have now, they might not even take place. It's just our imagination that creates those. How the problem is, how do we live with it, right?
This is why Bhagavan is always going back to the root. That is, so long as we rise as ego, we do have a will, and we do experience certain things, whether we like it or not. So will and fate both are as real as ego.
That's right. Yes. So long as
but that's why Bhagavan says in the second sentence of verse 19 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says, those who have known themselves, who is the one origin for fate and will, have discarded them. What he means by this is those who have known themselves, who is the one origin for fate and will. The origin for fate and will, what he referred to in the previous sentence as the root of fate and will, is what he refers to here as the origin of fate and will. That is ego. So what he means when he says those who have known themselves, he means those who have known the reality of ego. So when we know the reality of ego, ego will cease to exist. And when ego ceases to exist, its will and its fate will also cease to exist. That's why he said, those who have known themselves, who is the one origin for fate and will have discarded them. So if we investigate ourselves and know the reality of this ego, what we actually are, we will know this ego to be totally non-existent. And therefore its fate, its will and fate will also be non-existent. And then he says in the third and last sentence of the verse, say, will they thereafter be associated with them? Implying they will not be associated with them. Why will we not be associated with fate and will when we know ourselves? Because our connection with fate and will is only ego. Only when we rise as ego are we associated with fate and will. When we know ourselves as we actually are, ego is eradicated and we have no connection whatsoever with fate and will. So the root of it is ego. If you see, this is just one verse of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, but if you see in so many verses of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan is pointing out ego is the root of everything. That is, he says in the fourth verse, for example, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? So what is it? But when he says, if we are a form, what does that mean? When we rise as ego, we take ourselves to be the form of a body. So if we are for form means if we rise as ego, the world and God will be forms. That is, God, the world will be all these names and forms, and God will be seen to be something other than ourselves. Therefore, he's a form. Even if you say no, God is formless, your idea that God is formless, that idea you have about God is itself a form.
Yes.
So all forms come into existence only when we rise as ego. That's one place. In the sixth verse, he says, the world is nothing but the five kinds of sense impression. Sight, sounds, tactile sensations, smells, and taste. It is nothing other than that. So he said, is there a world other than the mind? That is, in other words, he's saying this world is perceived by us. It's nothing but our perception of it. So is there a world other than we who perceive it? So again, he's pointing back to ego. Though he says their mind, he's talking about the mind as the perceiver. Mind as perceiver is ego.
But that means that whatever is perceived cannot have a will, basically. So including this body.
But ego is not what is perceived. Ego is the perceiver.
So we cannot perceive ego with the six senses. It's
no. Because the ego is that which is seen through the six senses, or five senses, or whatever, however many senses.
Yeah. They cannot perceive the root because they're created by the root. So
So in so many verses, Bhagavan is pointing out ego is the root, and he summarizes it all in verse 26 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. He says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. Because if we investigate this ego will cease to exist, and therefore everything else will cease to exist. So the whole problem, according to Bhagavan, is ego. So the question now is ego real or false?
Well, so long as we experience ourselves, it will look as real to us.
It look as real.
But the thing is,
how does it look as real? Why does ego look as real?
Because it's the thing that doesn't require any proof. Because be it myself or yourself, to know our body, we need a mirror so that we know how Michael looks like, how Denis looks like. But from before we even understood we are in this world, we probably already knew that we exist. The time. And I doesn't require a mirror to know that it exists.
Exactly.
Therefore, actually, it's one primal thing that doesn't require any proof for us. Everything else may cause doubts, but not the I feeling. I feeling is always there. It's the first one.
So,
but I have another question, Michael.
Yes.
Here, Bhagavan mentioned many times that you have to use your inner eye to investigate.
Yes.
So that's the tricky point, actually, because I never saw anyone asked what is actually this inner eye. How do you find it? Because actually it must be beyond the body, because if it's in the body, then you cannot find ego with it. So that's a very interesting thing that I seldom see that anyone discusses. What is this inner eye?
What he means by inner eye is our power of attention.
But attention is a feature of the mind.
It's a feature of ego. Yes. Can I say a bit more about ego? Because then I'll be able to answer it. I mean, this is a very good question you've asked, but if I talk more about ego first, that is, Bhagavan often said, ego doesn't exist. There's no such thing as if we investigate it, we'll find there's no such thing as ego at all. However, he clarified, though ego as ego is unreal, there is an element of reality in ego. That is, ego is the mixed awareness. I am this body. Ego is neither the pure I am, nor is it this body. It's some spurious entity, but links the two together. But when we rise as ego, we are aware of ourselves as I am Denis or I am Michael or whoever. That mixed feeling, I am Denis, in that mixed feeling is ego. But in that mixed awareness, Denis, I am Denis, there is that real, the reality is I am. So though ego as ego is unreal, ego as I am is real. That is, if you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the snake is wholly non-existent as a snake, but it is real and it exists as a rope. So when we investigate this ego, we will see the reality of ego, what ego actually is. That is the pure awareness I am. So ego will then cease to be ego and will remain just as pure awareness. It is because of this element of reality in ego, but everything else seems to be real. In a dream, so long as we're dreaming, the dream world seems to be real. Why is that? Because in the dream, we experience ourselves as a body. That body is actually unreal, but so long as we experience it as I am this body, because I am is real, the body seems to be real. And because the body is a part of the world, the whole world seems to be real. So that is why in our present dream also, this body seems to be real and the whole world seems to be real. But where it gets its seeming reality from is only from I am. So the one thing that is actually real is I am. So when we understand the nature of ego, though ego as ego is unreal, it is real as pure awareness. So ego is not wholly unreal. But what is unreal is the form. What is real is the substance. The substance is I am. The form is unreal. So if we apply this now to this, what you've asked about this inner I, Bhagavan uses that term inner I, ahakan, in verse 44 of Aruṇāchala. He says what Aruṇāchala taught him. Obviously, Aruṇāchala didn't teach him words. Aruṇāchala taught in silence, but Bhagavan translated that silence into words for us because our minds are very gross and outward going. We need words. So what Bhagavan says is, he quotes Aruṇāchala saying, Tirambiyaham, turning within, dinam ahakankan, Tane, dinam ahakankan, see yourself with the inner eye. The term he used there is ahakan, that means the inner eye. So what is that inner eye? Is attention. When we turn this inner eye outwards, this whole world appears. That is this power of attention. The power of attention is the very nature of ego. Ego always has a power of attention. So, because what is the power of attention? Basically, the power of attention is just awareness. But when we're aware of many things, we can choose to focus our awareness on one thing or a set of things. So that ability to be selectively aware, in other words, to focus our awareness on one thing rather than another thing, is what we call attention. Generally, we're attending to one thing or other outside ourselves. That means whether outside doesn't mean outside the body. Anything extra, anything other than ourselves is what Bhagavan calls outside. So even our thoughts, our feelings, everything is outside. So at any one time we're attending to one thought or one object in the world, we're always attending to things other than ourselves. Now Bhagavan says that I, which we're using to attend to other things, we have to turn back within to face ourselves. So that is the basic tool by which we know anything is the power of attention. We are misusing that tool by knowing other things, experiencing other things. We now need to use that tool wisely by turning within to know the knower. In other words, we have to turn our awareness back on itself. We have to turn our attention back towards ourselves. That is what he means by the inner eye. So that is the real element of ego, because ego, as Bhagavan says in verse 24 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, he describes it very clearly. He says, the insentient body does not say I. What he means when he says say I, he's using the word say there metaphorically. The insentient body is not aware of itself as I, is what it implies. So this body has no awareness of its own. When death comes and ego departs, the body doesn't know anything. So the body is Jada. Not only the body, Bhagavan says all the 5 sheaths are Jada. Because when he says in verse 5 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, the body is a form of 5 sheaths. So when he says ego is the false awareness, I am this body, he's not just referring to a gross body, he's referring to all the 5 sheaths. That is the physical form, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. These 5 are what are called 5 sheaths. So we experience these collectively as ourself. So this is what Bhagavan refers to as body. He says all these 5 are jada. What is real is Sat-Chit. Sat-Chit doesn't rise. Sat-Chit means the being awareness, the awareness I am, the awareness of our own existence. That doesn't rise. That is permanent. It's always shining. So the body isn't aware of I. The Sat-Chit, the pure awareness I am, doesn't rise. But in between these two, one thing called I rises as the measure or as the limit of the body, as the extent of the body. That is, when he says it rises in between, it doesn't literally mean in between, because obviously there can be no space in between Sat-Chit and anything else, because Sat-Chit is the substance, the body is a form. You cannot find any space between the gold and the necklace, because the gold is the substance. But so he's using the term here in between in a metaphorical sense. Why he says in between? Because it is neither this nor that, but it partakes of the properties of both. It takes of as he says, it rises as the measure of the body. So it's limited to the extent of a body. That is it's limited in time and it's limited in space. I am here, I'm not out here. I'm only inside here. That's we feel we're limited within the body, and this body is limited in time. It was born at such and such a time. It's undergoing so many changes, and one day it's going to die. So the limitation in time and space arises when we take a body as I. But we also borrow from Sat-Chit. What do we borrow from Sat-Chit? We borrow the basic awareness I am. So ego is neither the basic awareness I am, nor is it Sat-Chit. As he says in the next verse, in verse 25, it's a formless phantom. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. It's a phantom because it's got no substance of its own. It borrows the form of the body and it borrows the substance of Sat-Chit. And without these, it doesn't exist at all. So he says in verse 25, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form means it takes a body as I. That's the first grasping. And only after it grasps the form of a body as I, does it become aware of so many other forms. So grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. That is, having grasped the form of a body as I, it then through the 5 senses, it's aware of so many other forms, and it's constantly attending to those things. That's what he means by grasping form. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Leaving one form, it grasps another form. So ego is always grasping form. That means we're always attending to things other than ourselves, because ego itself is formless. So any form is something other than itself. So long as we attend to anything other than ourselves, we are nourishing and sustaining ego. But then he said the most important sentence in this verse, possibly the most important sentence in the whole of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Tēdinal otum pidicum. That means if sought, it takes flight. That is, we seem to be ego so long as we are attending to things other than ourselves. When we turn our attention back within to know ourselves, this ego takes flight, as he says. That is, we cease to be ego when we attend to ourselves. We seem to be ego only when we're attending to other things. To the extent to which we attend to ourselves, ego subsides and dissolves back into its source. So this is what we're trying to do when we practice self-attention. We're trying self-investigation. We're trying to attend only to ourselves. However, because of this, yes.
Let's go back to our dreams, and because, well, our life is not only this waking world, but also a lot of time we're asleep, and we're seeing the dreams there. And what it means that we must do the same in all of the states, including the dream. But the thing is that it's also revolves around the will. Basically, it's my experience. And when I'm sleeping, it just looks as if I have a will there. But if
when you're dreaming, you mean? Oh,
yeah. When I'm dreaming and sleep, it looks as if I have a will there. But I know when I wake up, then it's not a will. It was a destiny there, or fate, that the whole dream and sleep, and from the very beginning until the very end, is a sort of a phenomena that was created, but it looks as if it's created as a script. So it just has to run through, regardless of my I experience. I itself, if we take two states, sleep, dreaming sleep, and this waking state, it's the same I, maybe different bodies, maybe different walls, but the ego is
the same.
But even though it's partially real, as you say, borrow the reality from the awareness, the consciousness that exists everywhere, let's say. And then all of a sudden, it produces a sort of a movie to watch. Which it looks as if we have a will, but in fact, it was pretty much written for us.
That is, it is, the dream is not happening according to our will, but we do have a will. Some things happen in the dream, but we like. Some things we dislike. We experience desire, we experience fear.
But then again, the thoughts about liking and disliking in both states are pretty much overimposed on us, because we have a body. If, for example, we didn't have a body, we wouldn't have desires at all. Because why would we have a desire if we don't have a body? Problem is that it all, and if the body is only a seeming reality, then whatever is linked with it, including desires, dislikes, everything is also fiction. That means it looks as if we desire something, but in fact, it's only I that is we know is I know, at least it's real in every of these states. Then there is something that it seems to perceive, including the body and the world, and then becomes desires and fears and dislikes and every other stuff. But we cannot say we have to be willfully aware in this dream or reality to find out what I is, because pretty much everything is the result of the I, and you cannot find a result, cannot find the cause. Logically, it's impossible. So we have to get rid of the result.
Yes. But in order to get rid of the result, we need to get rid of the cause. The cause is ego.
So how to find the cause then, if we are already in the result?
That is ego. Now we seem to be ego. So long as we are aware of anything other than ourselves, we seem to be ego. That is ego. Ego is that which is aware of other things, and which is two defining characteristics of ego. Firstly, as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this body. The body may change, but there's always a body, but we experience as I.
But also there is a world.
Because we experience ourselves as the form of a body, we consequently experience a world. So these are two defining characteristics of ego. Firstly, as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this body, and consequently, we're aware of other things. So the awareness of ourselves as a body and of other things, that which is aware of these things is ego. Not the pure I am. The pure I am is never aware of any body or world or anything. It's aware just I am. So now we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, I am Denis, or I am Michael. And consequently, we're aware of this world. And we have likes and dislikes and desires and attachments, and all these things arise. The root of everything is this ego. This ego is not the body, but it takes itself to be. What ego essentially is just that basic awareness I am. But that basic awareness I am is not ego. So ego is neither the body, nor is it that basic awareness, but the element of reality in ego is only that basic awareness I am. So when we turn our attention within means away from other things, back towards ourselves, we are turning our attention away from all forms, all phenomena, back towards the I that is aware of phenomena. The I that is aware of phenomena is ego, but it's aware of phenomena only so long as it attaches itself to a body. When it turns its attention back to itself, it begins to subside and dissolve back into its source. That's why Bhagavan said, if sought, it takes flight. No one has ever actually seen ego. When we're looking outwards, we seem to be ego. When we look back within to see where is this ego, there's no such thing to be found. So if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, that is, if we attend to ourselves so keenly, but we cease to be aware of anything else and aware only of I am, that is a state of pure awareness. In that state, ego dissolves and is eradicated forever. In that state, it becomes clear, but there never was any such thing as ego. And therefore, there never was any world or will or fate, or none of these things exist. They all exist only for ego. When we find ego doesn't exist, all these things don't exist. So this is what we're trying to do when we practice self-investigation. We're trying to turn our attention within to be aware of ourselves alone. But however, though we try this, and though we are to some extent able to focus our attention on ourselves, we are not yet able to completely withdraw our attention from all other things. That is because we still have desires and attachments. Even when we're attending to ourselves, we're holding on to some extent to awareness of other things. So we never are aware of I am alone in the stage of practice, but we can be. That is what we're aiming for. Our aim is, when we're trying to turn our attention within, we're trying to be so keenly self-attentive, but we cease to be aware of anything else. But the deeper we go in this practice, the more other things recede into the background of our awareness, until eventually we'll be aware only of ourselves. And ego will thereby be destroyed, and all other things will cease to exist along with it.
Well, naturally, it's going to happen anyway, sooner or later, because sooner or later the body is going to die. So
no, but that is not a solution. Because, as Bhagavan says in verse 25, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, that is, when you leave one form, you grasp another form.
But between grasping another form and leaving this one, there is probably a very short moment where you can still, without any interference, can understand what I actually is.
No, it's a state like you can. If you've been practicing this. If you've been practicing this,
then it's going to be easy when you die, just to try to find the moment.
It will be easy only if you've been persistently practicing during this. Because what happens to most people at the time,
people are afraid today.
Yeah, most people, when the body is dying, their mind goes outwards and they're grasping it is said people who've nearly drowned, at the moment when they're almost dying, they see their life being all the highlights of their life, as it were, they see like a movie. So that's the mind going outwards, trying to grasp the familiar things. If we actually die, we then subside into a manolaya, into a state like sleep. And in that sleep, the dreams will resume. So we then take another life, because every life is just a dream. And the dreams occur in a sleep. That sleep, the metaphorical sleep self-ignorance. That is the background in which all these dreams occur. That's said for explanatory purposes. So when we die, when this body dies, actually the body doesn't die. It's just the dream comes to an end. People who've had near-death experiences often they say according to their beliefs, they have different experiences. If they're Hindus, they say they see Lord Shiva or Vishnu in Vaikuntha or Shiva in Kailash. If they're Christian, if they're Christians, they see the pearly gates and they're about to enter the pearly gates. Whatever it is, those are all states of dream. That is, sometimes when the body dies, instead of falling asleep, we just have a dream like that. But whatever it is, sooner or later, that dream becomes a dream like this, another so-called life, in which there are so many small dreams. So long as ego exists, ego is the dreamer. So long as there's the dreamer, it will continue dreaming. The dreamer cannot be dreaming all the time. It needs to rest in sleep. It continues dreaming. It rests in sleep, it continues dreaming. This will continue. This is not dependent on any one body, because in each dream, it projects a new body. This body is as much a mental projection as the body we experience in any other dream. So the death of the body can be beneficial for a spiritual aspirant, because if we've been persistently practicing self-attentiveness, but have not yet been able to let go of everything else, at the time of death, it's a favorable moment. If we turn our attention within at that moment, it's an opportunity to eradicate ego. But if we still have desires and attachments, we'll be clinging to other things, and then we go into either another dream or another sleep, and again, it continues. Except that it's a good opportunity for us to take the final leap.
To try to find out what is I, but need some practice to know how to use the tool beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. We need lots of practice, lots and lots of practice. Because the more we practice, the more our inclination to attend to other things, that is the Vishaya vāsanās, that's what Vishaya vāsanās means. Vishaya means phenomena. Vāsana means inclination. So the inclination towards phenomena, the inclination to experience phenomena are what are called Vishaya vāsanās. That is what is constantly drawing our mind outwards, away from ourselves. So we need to weaken our Vishaya vāsanās to a considerable extent in order to be willing to surrender ourselves completely. So that is why persistent practice is necessary. When we don't know how close we are to finally letting go entirely, but when our mind is purified, when our Vishaya vāsanās are weakened to a sufficient extent, and that is proportional to the extent to which our Vishaya vāsanās are weakened, our Satvasana is increased. Satvasana means the inclination just to be as we are. So that is what we are cultivating when we practice self-attentiveness. Another name for Satvasana is Swatma Bhakti, that is love for our own real nature. So as Bhagavan said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. It's only by love that we can know ourselves. And here again, we come back to the will, because what is bhakti? It's our will, it's love. So the will, it is our will that has, by our will, we have risen as ego and projected all this and created all this karma and all this bondage and everything. We must use our will in the opposite direction. Instead of directing our will outwards towards other things, we need to direct our will inwards. We need to give up desire for anything other than ourselves and have love only to know ourselves. And that love is the key to knowing what we actually are. That's why Bhagavan often said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. That shows that the will is absolutely central to Bhagavan's teachings, because the will, it's by our will that we've created this bondage. It's by our will that we can liberate ourselves from this bondage.
The problem and misconception sometimes between when, for example, you read the forums, people mistake the will of I with the will of Michael or Denis. That's the biggest problem.
Michael and Denis, that is, the will is a part of Michael or Denis. That is, Michael and Denis consist of 5 sheaves. That is, there's a physical form, there's the life, there's the mind, there's the intellect and the will. The subtlest of the 5 sheaves is the will. The will is a part of Denis, a part of Michael. You are not the ego is not the will, but ego never exists without the will. That is, first ego attaches itself to this will. That is the very nature of.
Michael, I have another question then. If you say Michael consists of 5 C's, but when, for example, you are dreaming in sleep, there is also another person there. That one is also consisting on 5 C's, right?
Yes.
But even though the C's, some of them are the same, but will must be one. Because otherwise,
the will carries on from life to life. Yes, that is what is carried over.
That means it's probably not in the same domain as, for example, this dream domain or another dream domain.
That is why
it's something that is with the I, something that is with I, and not with this body.
Yes, but you are not your desires. You are not your vāsanās.
Of course not.
They are your vāsanās. So that is,
I am not right, but that's what I mean. So basically, the will,
the ego. That is, Bhagavan classifies all these 5 sheaves, including the will, as the body, and which is jada. That is, desires aren't aware of themselves. You have a desire to eat a chocolate. You are aware of the desire, but the desire is not aware of itself. So the ego is sometimes called the sakshi, the witness. It's that which is aware of all these things. So you who are aware of your desires, the desires are objects known by you, but these desires are intimately bound up with ego. That is, whenever we rise as ego, the first sheath we take on is our will. And then the others, but they all actually come together. But the most basic of the 5 sheaves is the will.
And the subject is only one everywhere there, and there's only one subject.
There's only one subject. In a dream, there's only one dreamer. Yeah. But that subject and its will are 2 distinct things. That is, when we in order to know ourselves as we actually are, we need to separate ourselves from everything all phenomena. All the 5 sheaves of phenomena, they're all things known by us. We know our likes, we know our dislikes, they're all objects known by us. Though as ego, we're very intimately bound up with these. We need, in self-investigation, we are not trying to attend to our desires. We're trying to attend only to the I who has these desires. That is the way in which we separate ourselves, distinguish ourselves. This is what is called in Sanskrit, drik drisya viveka. We're trying to distinguish the seer from the seen. The seer is ego. The desires and everything else are things that are seen by us.
Only objects.
They're only objects. But the ego, we never rise as ego without having desires. That is because the desires are part of the form of 5 sheaths that we always grasp as I.
So that is why if we practice diligently, probably at the time of death, we have enough courage to look at ourselves.
Time of death is a very favorable time because
when there is no other option than to give up, of course, he rightly says, those who have, in the time of death are grasping the feet of God.
Yeah, then exactly. That's what it means. That's what the feet of God is I. That which is shining in our heart is I. That is the feet of God.
That's the most important thing, and that in my heart, I understand that very well. So
yes.
just we have to continue practicing.
But for that, we must be willing to let go of everything. We must have that love to just to be as we actually are.
Yes, that's true. Yes, with enough grace, we'll do it.
Yeah.
I'm very much sure about it.
Yes.
That was. I hope that you enjoyed all this conversation.
Oh yeah. But this is because this is the heart of Bhagavan's teaching. Bhagavan's teachings is all about what we actually are and how we seem to be this something other than what we actually are. The root cause of all these problems is ego. So Bhagavan wants us to investigate this ego minutely, to distinguish the ego from all the 5 sheaves. So we need to turn our attention away from everything back to know the knower, see the seer, witness the witness. That is, we need to be aware only of this I am. When we are aware of this I am, we cease to be the knower of anything else. When we're aware of ourselves just as I am, we cease to be the knower of anything else, and we remain just as that pure awareness I am.
That's true. Well,
but so long as we rise as ego, we cannot deny either will or fate. Both are there.
If we see the world, there must be something going on.
Yeah. That is, yeah.
That's true. That's true. Well, for me, it was also a very, very insightful conversation, I would say.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that you found time to speak.
Well, this is because though that is, having come to Bhagavan's teachings are extremely simple. All we need to do is to investigate and know who am I. That's all there is to it. But the problem is, because we still have so much interest in other things, our task now is to wean our mind off its interest in other things. So the best way to wean our mind off is by turning within. But in order to turn within, we need to have that motivation to turn within. So often thinking about Bhagavan's teachings, talking about them, discussing them, this is all encouraging us to put it into practice, reminding us to put it into practice. Because we really can't think about this subject. Even in the midst of our conversation, what have we been talking about today? The basic topic we've been talking about is ego. So what is this ego? What is this I? That is automatically, even in the midst of our talking about it, our attention is going within towards this I.
But it's the most important goal in our life, to find out exactly what we are.
It is the only real goal. It is the only worthwhile goal. All other goals are futile because
they're going to be
yeah. Whatever great things we achieve in this world, right? We may be the greatest scientist or the greatest saint or the greatest politician, or we do all sorts of great things. It's all good. It's a dream. When the body comes to an end, the dream comes to an end. So nothing is worthwhile except knowing who am I.
Absolutely.
So all this talk about Bhagavan's teachings is just constantly dinning into us. There's only one thing that we need to know. One thing, that is, who am I?
And he began with this in his Nāṉ Ār, I think. Everyone wants happiness, and for that, oneself must know oneself.
That first paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, that wasn't part of the answers that Bhagavan gave to Shiva Prakashan Pillai. When he wrote it, when he rewrote the questions and answers as an essay, he added that first paragraph. So that first paragraph is the most important paragraph of all.
Knowing oneself is necessary. That's
That's
the summary of everything there.
Everything. Exactly.
So I completely agree. So probably we have to finish at this moment.
Yes.
Even though it's such
The sooner we finish permanently, the better.
That's true.
The trouble is, all our finishings are temporary finishings. We need to bring about the permanent finishing.
That's true. But it should run the natural course anyway. So, some people would think that probably it's better just to, end their lives or whatever, but it's not the right way to do so, because
we're only ending the life of a physical form. That's no solution.
Absolutely not. It's going to be another. Maybe who knows which one is going to be better,
Yeah.
Better not risk.
Yeah. Now we're here. Let's make the best use of the time we have here to try to know ourselves.